In March of 2026, Anthropic admitted something extraordinary. Some power users of its $20 a month Claude Code subscription had each burned thousands of dollars worth of compute. On your screen, $20 buys a chat box. On their side, that same click pulls racks of chips, megawatts of power, a server farm that never sleeps. Same button, wildly different bill. And listen to how the CEO talks about it now.
By $1 trillion of compute that starts at the end of 2027. And if my revenue is not $1 trillion, if it's even 800 billion, there's no force on earth. There's no hedge on earth that could stop me from going bankrupt.
So who exactly do you think is making up the difference? And what happens to that subscription the moment the math stops working? Because in April of 2026, the math started to crack, and you might have noticed without realizing what you were seeing. On paper, it should be impossible. To run something like Claude or GPT in your own home, the same context, the same response speed, you would need a stack of NVIDIA H100 GPUs, roughly 32 of them in a server rack taller than you. Call it $1 million in hardware, plus the power bill of a small office. Or $20 a month, one click. None of it adds up, yet here we are. In 2026, 5 companies, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta, and Oracle, are committing nearly $700 billion in AI infrastructure. That is roughly the entire economy of Switzerland. It is twice what they spent in 2025. OpenAI burns $2 in cost for every $1 of inference revenue. That's the leaked Microsoft revenue share number, and it has not improved. And to rent that same compute on the open market, a cloud provider would need to charge about $4 an hour just to break even. The actual market rate today is $1.65. Even renting the hardware out, the math doesn't close. On Meta's earnings call this April, an analyst asked Mark Zuckerberg the obvious question.
Know some of the key factors you're watching over the next 12 to 24 months, whether it's Meta AI, Muse advances, core algorithm. What are you sort of watching for most, just to make sure that you're on the right path to generating healthy ROIC on all this CapEx and infrastructure spend?
That's a very technical question for, basically where...
It isn't. It's the only question. And while analysts were asking, the subscriptions themselves were quietly being repriced. OpenAI added a $100 monthly tier. This is what you noticed in April, without realizing what you were seeing. Anthropic shipped a new model with a tokenizer that produces 35% more tokens per request, a stealth price hike. ChatGPT tightened its limits. PC World called it the end of the $20 AI subscription era. Across the entire industry, the people building this thing cannot tell you how it pays for itself. Before we ask whether the math catches up, there's a harder question underneath it. Forget the cost for a second. Is the demand even real, or is this whole thing just hype dressed up as growth? Listen to how Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, answers that.
If you were to annualize it, 80x growth per year. Ooh. That is the reason we have had difficulties with compute, right? We've planned for anything from it only grows a little to it grows 10x, and yet we saw 80x.
He is not warning. He is explaining why the entire industry has a problem they cannot build their way out of fast enough. To deal with it, Anthropic just rented Elon Musk's entire data center in Memphis, a facility called Colossus One. 220,000 NVIDIA GPUs, 300 megawatts of power, the whole thing. A 5 gigawatt deal with Google. That's 5 nuclear reactors worth of power for one company, plus a $30 billion Azure commitment and a separate Amazon agreement. None of this is the behavior of a company trying to lure customers in. This is the behavior of a company drowning in them. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, on a podcast this spring, said something similar from his side of the deal. His real bottleneck, he said, is no longer chips. He has the chips. The constraint is what he calls warm shells, physical data center space with power that he can plug GPUs into. He has NVIDIA hardware sitting in boxes, in warehouses, waiting for the concrete to set. The supply side side of compute can't keep up with itself, and at the firm level, the cost curve is already moving. The information leaked Anthropic's internal projections last fall. Gross margin on inference in 2024, negative 94%. Every query was burning nearly twice what the customer paid. By 2025, the same projection flipped, positive 40% gross margin. The bet has a precedent, and that's exactly why the believers aren't scared. Back in 2012, when Amazon Web Services was still losing money and skeptics called it a distraction, Jeff Bezos sat down at a developer conference and explained the strategy out loud.
Principles, we operate in a low margin way in our retail business, but also in AWS, and all of these principles can be applied to Amazon Web Services.
Actually, coming to low margins, I mean, yesterday and also today, we talked a lot about how AWS is a high volume, low margin business.
AWS lost money for nearly a decade. Then it became the most profitable part of Amazon. Today, AWS makes up about 17% of Amazon's revenue, but it produces nearly 70% of Amazon's operating profit. Once you've built the servers, the money is almost all yours to keep. The cost curve eventually caught up. The strategy worked. Stanford's AI Index measured that the cost of running a GPT 3.5 level model has fallen 280 times in 18 months. 280! If that curve keeps going, the $20 subscription that loses money today becomes a 50% margin product by 2027 without raising the price. That is the bet. The problem is the cash might run out first. Bain & Company calculated that the AI industry needs $2 trillion in annual revenue by 2030 to justify the current spend. Even under their optimistic scenario, they project an $800 billion shortfall. Operating loss at $74 billion a year by 2028. Last June, Goldman Sachs published a research note titled Gen AI, Too Much Spend, Too Little Benefit? Its head of equity research, Jim Cavello, wrote that AI currently costs about 6 times what the manual work it is replacing costs. 6 times. So if the cost curve doesn't catch up in time, someone has to eat the difference. In November of 2025, at the Wall Street Journal Tech Live conference, in front of investors and reporters, the CFO of OpenAI was asked exactly that question.
Of banks, private equity, maybe even governmental, the ways governments can come to bear.
Meaning like a federal subsidy or something?
Meaning like just first of all, the backstop, the guarantee that allows the financing to happen, that can really drop the cost of the financing, but also increase the loan to value, so the amount of debt that you can take on top of an equity portion for
so some federal backstop for chip investment.
Exactly.
OpenAI walked it back within 24 hours. The CFO had not, they said, been asking for a federal subsidy. But the words were already there. Federal backstop for chip investment. Exactly. The most senior financial officer at the most valuable AI company in the world said in front of cameras that the path forward involves the United States government underwriting the chips. And the story didn't stop there. 5 months later, in April of 2026, the Wall Street Journal reported that Fryer had begun publicly questioning whether OpenAI's revenue could ever support the $1.4 trillion it had already promised to spend on compute. According to people close to the company, Sam Altman has since stopped inviting her to the infrastructure meetings. The CFO, who said the quiet part out loud, is now being kept away from the room where it's being decided. The bill is real, and someone, somewhere, is being lined up to pay it. Across the Pacific, in Hangzhou, one man is playing the same game by the opposite rules. His name is Liang Wenfeng, and his company, DeepSeek, charges between 7 and 9 times less. $56 billion, 6 times the $9.3 billion in Chinese venture capital. In America, the ratio runs the other way. The state is doing what Silicon Valley's VCs do here. Shanghai alone covers 80% of a local startup's compute bill. Imagine California paying 80% of every San Francisco startup's cloud bill. Beijing, Shenzhen, Hangzhou, Guangzhou and Chengdu run the same play. It's not subsidy disguised as venture capital. It's subsidy declared as state policy. The man who built DeepSeek, Liang Wenfeng, said something in an interview last year that lands differently after you've watched the OpenAI CFO ask for a federal backstop. He said, "Our principle is neither to sell at a loss nor to seek excessive profits. Neither at a loss nor for excessive profits." That is the opposite of every founding statement coming out of Silicon Valley, and the technical gap is closing fast. In April of 2026, DeepSeek released V4, a model that beat every open-weight competitor on the major benchmarks. It runs on Huawei's new Ascend 950 chip, no NVIDIA required. Within a month, Alibaba and Baidu were forced to cut their own API prices by more than 95%. Just to stay in the same conversation. Liang Wenfeng closed a $10 billion funding round in May, declaring artificial general intelligence as the explicit goal. The American chip embargo was supposed to keep China years behind on AI. It hasn't. The Center for Strategic and International Studies has a name for what's coming. They call it bifurcation. Not one global AI economy, two parallel ones, built on opposite bets. China has all but declared who pays. The question is whether the man running the American bet even knows. Back in San Francisco, the man at the center of the American bet had been talking too. On August 14th, 2025, at an off-the-record press dinner in San Francisco, Sam Altman sat down with a small group of reporters. The cameras were not invited. The conversation was supposed to be a soft preview of what was coming. Halfway through, one of the journalists asked him whether investors had gotten ahead of themselves. His answer, "Are we in a phase where investors as a whole are overexcited about AI?" My opinion is yes. The CEO of OpenAI saying yes to the bubble. When bubbles happen, he added, smart people get overexcited about a kernel of truth. Then he went further. He called it insane that startups consisting of 3 people and an idea were raising hundreds of millions. And he said, quote, "Some investors are likely to get very burnt here, very burnt." Said by the man whose company is making that bet. 24 hours later, sitting under Bloomberg's lights for a scheduled interview, he picked up the same theme, but not the same conclusion.
If we knew how to get $1 trillion right now, which we don't, would we be able to deploy that profitably in the next few years? And I'm not sure about that, but I feel confident we can make 500 billion of value back.
$1 trillion with a T that he doesn't have yet. Same man, same week, 2 sentences. The first admitted there was a bubble. The second committed to making it bigger. The honest version and the marketing version. Spoken into different microphones, 48 hours apart. This isn't a bubble that pops because no one wants AI. It's a bet that the cost curve catches up before the cash runs out. 2 countries are placing it with different chips, different money, and different ideas about who is supposed to absorb the loss. And when you click subscribe for $20 a month, you are not just paying for a tool, you are a passenger on someone else's wager. Whose? On what? That is the only question that matters now.